everyone. My name is Max Prilutsky. I run an M&A advisory firm called Roadmap Advisors, and I'm one of the founders of The Well. Happy to be here. My entire career has been in buying and selling businesses across different sectors. Been doing it for over 23 years. And we have a dedicated practice in our firm focused on food and beverage and consumer products. So again, happy to give kind of a high level overview of the M&A process and what you might be thinking about if you're looking to sell your consumer or food and beverage company. Overview of our firm, we're about 15 people. We're based just outside of Washington, D.C. Food and beverage is a top coverage area for us, food and beverage and consumer. We also specialize a bit in technology and health and wellness, kind of as it relates to consumer. Most of our clients are entrepreneurs, business owners, though we do some work on the buy side as well, meaning we represent larger companies and helping them find smaller businesses to buy. Our clients range. I think many of you on the call today are likely in the right-hand side of this slide. You're thinking about potentially, growing your business to eventually sell it. But as I mentioned, again, we also work with companies that get to a certain size and are looking to grow through acquisition. So again, we represent both buyers and sellers, which is a little unique and gives us, a bit of perspective on what buyers are looking for when they're going through an M&A process. Okay. An overview. So in food, beverage, and consumer as a whole, a couple of trends to be aware of. We had a big spike in commodity prices and a lot of disruption in supply chains during COVID. A lot of that has come back. But as we look to kind of the new administration, many business owners are pretty worried about the effect of potential tariffs, supply chain shocks, and then again, everyone's pretty interested in what will happen or not happen with inflation. In terms of buyer interest, you see, M&A volumes been relatively stable. We still see a lot of interest from both private equity and strategic buyers in this sector. We're getting calls all the time about, buyers actively looking for certain types of companies. I will say, relative to like 2018 or right before COVID, buyers are more picky and do have a more stringent lens on what might happen to a company in another potential disruption. But there's still plenty of interest out there. Many business owners, regardless of their political views, are expecting some sort of improvement to taxes. Although nobody really knows what will happen in next year. And then one thing to note, and we'll talk about valuation more later in this webinar, but transaction multiples continue to be widely varied. We see lower single-digit multiples for certain types of companies and mid double-digit EBITDA multiples for others. But we'll get into that later on in this presentation. Recent notable food and beverage deals. Again, we cover food and beverage pretty heavily. Lots of strategics, lots of private equity, really across almost all subsegments of food. We get contacted about interest in very specific baked goods or non-branded distribution companies. For almost any subsector within consumer and food and beverage, there are buyers out there for you. Okay, we're gonna talk a little bit about high level what the M&A transaction process is first, and then we'll go into how do you actually prepare for it, even if you're not selling today. So at a high level, when we talk to business owners, we always get asked, how do I know when is the right time? And our framework is these three components. So it's personal goals, it's timing, kind of market timing of the company, and then company preparedness. In terms of all three of these, so on personal goals, it's really kind of where you are. We see, a lot of business owners selling because they're looking to retire. We see business owners who are not necessarily looking to retire, but want to spend more time with family. We see business owners who just kind of hit a ceiling. They feel like they've grown the business as much as they can, and they really want someone else to come in and kind of take it to the next level. Um, there are also kind of more negative reasons or personal reasons that a business owner might want to look to sell. It could be a health crisis. You could have witnessed a friend go through something, and you're worried about what if something happens to me. It could be competitive pressures. So you're just seeing a lot more competition. The business is getting harder, and you'd kind of like to you know get value for what you've built so far and have someone else help you out in phase two. In terms of timing, it's a combination of market timing, but also company timing. So most of you are probably aware that the valuations of businesses are closely tied to their current financials. So generally, selling in a good year for your business is going to get you a higher valuation than selling in a bad year for your business. Just common sense. Similarly, markets go up and down. Selling in a down market can be pretty tough, especially if you saw, valuations from a year ago, 2 years ago being much higher. In general, most business owners and most advisors are pretty bad at forecasting the future. So in terms of timing, I think you can kind of triangulate on whether or not it's roughly the right time, but I don't know that there's anything as a perfect time to sell a business. And then finally, and this is one where we help a lot in terms of during the process, is just company preparedness. So there are certain criteria that all buyers will go through to evaluate your business and evaluate whether or not it's an attractive acquisition opportunity for them. That includes financials. It includes more qualitative aspects like who is on the management team, how deep is the management team, what is the business model, and how attractive or not that business model is. It's a review of all of the kind of non-financial KPIs that you track. And it's really, having a platform for growth, because most business owners will pay you a multiple of your earnings, not because they get any claim to those prior earnings. It's because they're investing in the future. So what's the growth look like? So when you again look at these three together and try to triangulate, the right timing for when you go to market to go sell your business. When you do decide that it's time, this is roughly what the process looks like. So first, you would meet with someone like us or another advisor, and you would go through an early planning process. You would set goals. You would discuss valuation. You would discuss what you want out of a transaction. You would have an advisor let how reasonable or not that is. You would then put together kind of high-level financial documents, give your advisors an understanding of where your business is relative to some of the most important aspects of what buyers will look into. And then discuss this proposition, this potential process with other advisors. So not just your M&A advisor, but your CPA, your legal counsel, your trusted mentors, your board of advisors, what have you. And then at that point, we typically get together with our client and we look for, are there any opportunities in the near term to really increase your value? So, in general, there are guidelines for what a buyer might pay for a certain type of business, but there are certain things that can be done in relatively short order, matter of months, not years, that could significantly increase the value of a company. And we typically go through that before we hit the go button with a client. Once we decide that everything's ready, we really go to work and compile sell side marketing materials. So these are basically materials that describe your business in great detail that would be available to any potential interested buyer. And that usually is comprised of a 1 to 4 page high level executive summary. It's followed by a 50 to 80 page slide deck that describes the ins and outs of how your business runs, who runs the business, what the revenue model is, what the growth opportunities are, what your market looks like, all of your financials. And we put together a due diligence data room where all of the relevant detailed documents are organized and accessible and easy for someone to look through. Now, all of those materials are not just made available to the whole world. We typically work with our clients to vet a potential buyer list. We reach out to those buyers on behalf of our client and preview the opportunity. If they are interested and if they are pre-qualified by us as being, potentially real, we have them sign a confidentiality agreement, and only then do they get access to certain materials. So once all of the materials are put together, we've got kind of the deck, the due diligence room all done. We identify, contact the buyers, reach out to them, and then we usually go through a 1 month or so process where buyers just have access to us to ask questions about the business. The reason for that is, if the sale process is relatively broad, meaning we go to a lot of potential buyers, we don't want all of them bothering the business owner while they have a business to run. And so again, this is relatively high level Q&A with initially interested buyers. And we go through kind of what their top concerns are. We feed those back to management. We try to get questions answered. We try to really get on top of any potential red flags that are instantly identifiable. And then ultimately we set an IOI date. So an IOI is an indication of interest. We ask all of our interested buyers to submit a 1 to 3 page non-binding document saying, I am interested in buying this company on roughly these terms for this valuation. Again, it's non-binding. Sometimes those IOIs come in with a range of values, not a specific price. And we just use that to kind of cull the herd to really figure out who is most interested and who should we be talking to. So we choose the top bidders, assuming there's a good number is 5 to 8 interested buyers. We then invite those buyers to actually talk to management. In most cases, they will travel to come see you in person. If there is, a manufacturing facility, for instance, they would want to go tour it. And we have a more detailed exchange of information. They'll ask more detailed questions. Sometimes they get their accountants involved early to review your financials. And we go back and forth, do all the work that they need to then submit an LOI. So unlike an IOI, which is an indication of interest, an LOI is a letter of intent, and that's a typically 7 to 10 page document. It is still not legally binding for the most part in terms of value and structure, but it typically lays out one specific price and a specific structure, how the deal will get financed, whether or not there are any contingencies, if there's an earnout or a rollover piece of the deal, all of that will get detailed out in the LOI. And we then go back and forth with, assuming the LOIs come in relatively in the same range, we come in and negotiate with those top interested parties with the goal of ultimately selecting one. And I mentioned the LOI is not legally binding. It's not legally binding except for one element, which is exclusivity. So if you enter into an LOI with a prospective party, the one part that is legally binding is that you grant that one party exclusivity, meaning you are no longer allowed to talk to other potential interested buyers for a period of however many days, typically 60 days or 90 days. And again, once you pick that one party, the goal is within 45, 60, 90 days, you will have a closed transaction. During those 45 to 90 days, the buyer who now has exclusivity on this process with you, they will pull in third-party advisors. They will hire an accounting firm to do a quality of earnings analysis. They will engage their attorneys to look over all of your contracts, hiring practices, insurance. Um, they may do a phase one environmental study if that's relevant. They may do customer calls if that's relevant. They will review your tax filings. So kind of full kimono. They will review everything about your business. And during that time, you and your legal counsel will also negotiate the purchase agreement or the contract that ultimately governs the M&A deal. Then you close, and you have, after, potentially 6 or 9 months of work, you have this surreal day where everyone wakes up early in the morning, you get on a conference call, and you approve all of the wires going back and forth. In terms of the high level timeline, this can go very quickly, matter of a few months. It typically, for most lower middle market deals, for most deals under $100 million, this entire process from planning to closing is on average about 9 months. And the reason for that is really two bottleneck areas. One is when we're compiling the confidential information memorandum, basically the deck on the business, there's a bunch of information that we might need and that buyers will ultimately need. And if that information is not readily available, it often takes a company a lot more time to compile it and put it together and make sure that everything ticks and ties. So that can be done in a matter of a week or two, but it can also take a month or two. And then the other one is once you're in exclusivity, you're towards the end of the process. There can be negative due diligence findings. There can be a renegotiation. Something could have happened. The business can underperform. And so that can often delay the process as well. In terms of acquirer types, kind of the two, while there are nuances to these, the two main buckets are kind of strategics and private equity. And there are different types of strategics and different types of private equity. But when you're considering who to sell to, these two differ in terms of why they're buying your business, how long they're going to own it, how much they'll pay for you, how efficient they are in doing the deal, what happens to employees. So, for example, in terms of transaction purpose, private equity firms are really buying companies for a return. They don't have a strategy necessarily for what they want to do with a granola bar company, right? They just want to see financials go up and to the right. But if you're Campbell Soup, you probably have a very nuanced strategy, category by category, on what you are more or less bullish on and where you want to make investments. In terms of valuation, on average, strategics can pay a higher valuation because they often have synergies that are, readily available when they buy a company in their space. And private equity, there's a standard formula. There's an LBO model that all of the private equity firms will do, and some will be more aggressive, some will be less aggressive. But on the whole, private equity tends to come in the same band of valuations. Holding period, again, with strategics, it could be that you sell to PepsiCo and become a PepsiCo brand forever. With private equity, typical hold period is 3 to 7 years. So in 3 to 7 years, private equity will be looking to resell the business again. Employee retention, we know that's really important to most sellers. With private equity, on the whole, the bias is to maintain employees. Private equity has a pretty bad reputation, for slashing expenses. But in general, when buying healthy businesses that are growing, not the private equity firm has no interest in coming in and running the business for you. So in general, employee retention tends to be better with private equity as long as the company is doing well. With strategics, there can be, day one synergies, but those synergies mean that, duplicative roles. So if you sell to a larger company in your sector and you have a controller and they have a controller, they don't need two controllers. So most likely your controller is going to lose their job. So with employee retention, again, you have to weigh kind of which employees they need, which employees they don't need, how important that is to you, and what's the difference in valuation. Um, Deal efficiency, this is super important and sometimes blindsides sellers a bit. So private equity firms are in the business of doing deals. A private equity professional wakes up in the morning, checks their email, and has 10 deals in their inbox that they're going to evaluate. Strategics are in the business of manufacturing a food product or a cosmetics product or what have you. And doing M&A is sometimes core to their business, but many of the times it's not. And so when negotiating an M&A deal, the strategics often take a lot longer. In order for them to even sign the non-disclosure agreement with you, they may have to send it up to corporate legal that may be in a different country, and they may need to wait until their Monday morning meeting to approve it. And so, just every step of the process often takes longer. Um, and the final one I'll just highlight here is the seller ownership stake. So many private equity deals are structured so that when you sell the business, you as the seller retain some portion of ownership. Again, private equity wants you to be incentivized to continue to grow the business. And you often have what they like to call the second bite at the apple, or basically another opportunity to make money when in 3 to 7 years, the private equity firm sells your business again. And with strategics, that's most of the time not going to be the case. You're going to sell 100% of the business, you cash out and you're done. This is a slide we absolutely love. So there's a lot of text and numbers on here, but I'll describe it. So on the right hand side, we have case studies for actual clients that we represented for whom we ran this sell side process. And we put together the book and the due diligence room, and we allowed multiple people to provide bids on the business. These numbers here are actual values that we received in written form for offers for clients of ours that all saw the exact same information and put completely different valuations on a business. And it's the same for, a $10 million business or a $100 million business. And the reason we love this slide is, many companies, many business owners are contacted proactively by buyers and asked to engage in kind of a one-to-one negotiation, saying, we're interested in buying your company, send us your financials, we'll sign a non-disclosure, we'd like to give you an offer. So when you as the seller are going through that process, our question to you is, how do you know that the buyer you're talking to is, the $40 million buyer over here or the $145 million buyer, right? And so the beauty of running a competitive auction is when everyone is put on the same time frame, when everyone is put on the same terms, and the bids are due on the same day, and nobody else knows, what the others will bid, you actually get a very, very drastic difference between how potential buyers will value your business. And so we strongly, strongly recommend, even if your company has a very clear, potential exit, there's a strategic in your space that's super interested in you and has been following you since you started. You kind of have to keep them honest with a sell side process because, again, you don't know, even if you're getting a very attractive looking offer, you don't know where that offer sits along the spectrum of what others might pay for your business. The other benefit of running a process like this is just de-risking the transaction. So deals die all the time, and they die for lots of unforeseen reasons. It could be that a large strategic was interested in you, but then their head of M&A gets fired for whatever reason, and now no one's interested in you. It could be that there's a small hiccup in the deal that one specific buyer does not have the tools to overcome, but others might. Um, it could be that there are some buyers who expect just, very black and white, expect certain things to be there at a company, and when they do their diligence and don't see those, they walk away. The benefit of having multiple parties at the table at the same time is you always have a backup. So if something goes wrong with one potential buyer, you can go to another buyer and have them kind of pick up where the last one dropped off. Those very quick, very high level, but that's overall kind of the process of selling your business. And next, we're going to talk about kind of how do you prepare for that. So again, how you prepare for that really depends on where you are in this process. Are you just starting your business? Have you been at it for a couple of years? Have you been at it your whole life and you feel like you're behind? But I think we can help you at any of those points. Um, Taking a step back, what are buyers looking for? So we have this long 100-point checklist that we typically go through with all of our prospective clients. But all of those checks fall into one of six buckets. So it's financial, operations, reporting, your sales or go-to-market strategy, your industry slash your revenue model, and then what are you looking for from the deal? So in general, buyers are looking for healthy financials, profitable businesses, growing businesses, um, clean financials in terms of just making sure the financials actually track the performance of the business. There are certain metrics and KPIs that buyers typically have for businesses that they acquire. Most of the time when we talk to buyers who are very active, who buy like 10, 15 companies a year, they have their own rubric. They have their own 100-point checklist. And so when you meet with them, you got to meet their financial criteria in order for them to be interested. Operations, those items are really around, do you have the right people on the team? Do you have the right positions? Are all of your processes more or less organized and standardized? Can someone else come in there and start running the business for you, once ownership changes? Reporting is tied to financial, but just, how robust is your reporting? How much of it is manual versus automated? What metrics do you look at in running your business? Just looking at revenue and net income is not good enough, right? You need to have KPIs. You need to understand your return on marketing spend. You need to understand your return on people. You need to be able to provide revenue and profitability by product or service type. You need to be able to compare, budget for the future and compare actuals versus budgets. And again, a lot of times, especially smaller businesses with a single owner, there's no outside requirement for that. So the first time you do it is when you prepare for a sell side process. Sales and go to market, the main thing here is just understanding how you get new business and whether or not that is a high ROI process. So is most of your business direct to consumer? How do you get to the consumer? How much do you spend on Google and Facebook ads? And is that a high return on investment or not? Or if your sale process is more B2B, how effective are your salespeople? Do you measure that? Salesperson by salesperson, how much do they get paid? What's their commission? How much business do they bring in? Do you go through brokers? Do you go directly to buyers? How much of the economics are you giving up in the distribution process? So all of those are kind of sales go-to-market strategies. In terms of industry, in many cases, they're just different buyers have different preferences for, are you a manufacturer or are you co-packing? Are you a branded product or are you a white label product? So in many cases, just understanding where you fall vis-a-vis who your likely buyers are. And then transactions, just having an understanding of what type of deal you want to do. Do you want to sell 100%? Are you open to selling 80%? Are you open to taking seller paper or an earnout? There's no one right answer, just being aware of what your needs are and what buyers might use. Within food and beverage primarily, but more broadly consumer, these are kind of the five variables that we see really define specifically a food and beverage company, but they can be applied to consumer as a whole. So the first one I already mentioned is manufacturing. Do you manufacture your own products or does someone manufacture them for you? There are pros and cons to both. Typically, the economics are a lot better if you manufacture yourself in terms of profitability, but scaling is a lot harder and requires a lot of upfront investment. Certifications. So this is mostly relevant to food and beverage, but there are certain certifications that are really important. If you go through SQF, if you have outside auditors audit your practices, those are really important to buyers. Your go-to-market, we also talked about this a little bit already, but do you use brokers? Do you use a sales team? How much are you spending to get your products out there, and how do you do it? Again, pros and cons to different strategies there, but buyers will typically have a preference. Distribution, how do you distribute your products? How do consumers ultimately get your product? And then sales channel. Do you go through retail? Do you go through B2B? Are you direct to consumer? Do you go through club stores, et cetera? Again, this slide was put together mostly for food and beverage, but it's just as relevant for consumer products more broadly. Okay, so now that you've decided you're interested in potentially selling your business, we kind of break down what you can do to get ready and to improve your own valuation into three phases. Phase one is longer term. So let's say you're here today, you're running a small business, you're interested in eventually selling it, but it's probably not going to happen for 5+ years. So you're in phase one. What can you do today or over the next 5 years to improve the value of your business? And there's many different things you can do, but these are kind of the top ones that we would highlight for you. Number one, reduce owner involvement. So many small businesses, many businesses under 50 million in revenue are highly, highly, highly dependent on their owner. Their owner's name can be part of the brand. The owner likely has most of the big relationships with buyers. The owner hires and fires everyone on the team. The owner is the only one that sees all the financials. Like, we see this all the time. And in order for you to sell to a larger entity where you are no longer going to be involved, you really ought to think about removing yourself from the day-to-day sooner and moving your own responsibilities to working on the business as opposed to in the business. So that's a huge driver of value. In general, and we're seeing this with a deal right now. Like, buyers will pay a significant premium for a company where the owners are transitioned out, and they will likely have a lot of structure in the deal and pay a lower value if the owner if the business depends on the owner. The second biggest one is recurring revenue, and this does not exist for every type of business. Like, if you're manufacturing refrigerators, you're not likely to have recurring revenue. People are not buying a refrigerator every week. But in food and beverage, in a lot of consumer products, the more you can demonstrate that your revenue is either contractually recurring, non-contractually reoccurring, or just repeat. There's a lot of buyers or consumers who keep buying your stuff. However you demonstrate that, the higher it is, the better for your valuation. Diversification of revenue, diversification of suppliers, again, just avoids concentration risk. So if for instance, you're 5 years out from selling your business, you currently buy one raw material from one supplier, perhaps think about at least getting price quotes from others to see, if there's a supply shock, what happens to your product. Are you able to replace them with someone else? Cost controls, again, if you're 5 years out, don't go firing people just to cut your costs, but be aware of is there anything, at the end of the year, for instance, do an annual review of where you're spending money and are there any cost saving opportunities. And then the last one, super common in technology businesses, but I think it's just as relevant with consumer, is demonstrating something called LTV to CAC. So LTV to CAC is the lifetime value of a customer to the customer acquisition cost. So in other words, when you spend money on getting a new customer, and that could be you spend $10,000 in Google Ads, or it can be you pay $100,000 to a salesperson who's then going to bring in one client, and then the ratio of how much that client is worth to you to the acquisition cost. Um, Many small businesses outside of technology don't calculate this, but it's a very, very clear, tangible way to demonstrate that your business is profitable and scalable to a potential buyer. So I would recommend starting to calculate, at least go through the process early on. Okay, phase two, you're now let's say 2 years, a year and a half out from selling your business. What can you do? Um, I would say, develop a solid strategic plan, update your original business plan, but have something on paper that you could show to a potential buyer, and then, modify it over the course of a year. Identify who your key employees are, or if there are certain key positions where you don't have an employee. For instance, you always thought you needed a CFO, but you can't afford one. Maybe look into getting a fractional CFO. Um, Review your customer contracts. So this is a thing that, in many cases is not a big deal, but in B2B businesses, at the very end of a M&A process, uh, the other side will review all of your contracts, and if those contracts are not easily assignable to the new owner of the business, that could present a challenge. So just have your counsel look through your contracts for any potential issues. Um, Developing standardized operating procedures or SOPs. So again, if you're doing the same thing every day, like, is that documented somewhere? Is there a SOP book that you track? Um, KPIs. So what metrics are you tracking? What metrics is your team tracking? And then any intellectual property to the extent that you're a branded product, what do you have that's trademarked? Is anything patented? Just review what's the appropriate thing for you. And then phase three, again, this is now you're about ready to go hire an investment banker and sell your business. What can you do? And this is part of what we talked about earlier as kind of a value enhancement phase. You can sometimes do that in concert with your M&A advisor. It's organizing all of your documents, making sure you know where all the contracts sit, where your financials sit, where you have an actual org chart, you have a roster of employees, you have your lease, everything is at the ready. Having a consolidated financial model, so not just pulling something out of QuickBooks, but having a model that says, this is how much revenue we'll do if we sell this many SKUs at this volume. Let's see, having KPIs, again, measurable and constantly being updated. Tracking potential ad backs. So this is something we typically help you with, but if you run any sort of personal expenses through the business, or if there has been some sort of recent change or a non-recurring one-time expense, and many times we can pull that out of the financials to get you to demonstrate a higher profitability to get someone to pay more. So just tracking that, and again, you talk to your advisors about how you identify whether something could be an ad back or not. Have a formal org chart. Surprising how many companies don't have this, but having an org chart that shows who's in which role, and who reports to who. Having a sales pipeline. So again, it depends on the type of business, but if you are more B2B or sell through retail, who are the retailers that you're targeting? Where are you in those conversations? And who's in charge of each prospect? And then finally, a lot of companies get emails all the time, about, hey, we're interested in buying you. as you get closer, I would say it's important to start tracking those, especially those that seem more real, so that when you go hire someone to sell the business, um, you have an initial list. These are the people that have indicated that they're interested in buying our business. That's it at a high level, but that's it's a very quick overview, and I'd urge you guys to if you're interested in this at any point in the life cycle of your firm, reach out to us. We can help you with positioning and preparing. We can help you interview potential buyers for your company on a totally anonymous basis, and you'd be surprised how much they're willing to share. Before the company's even for sale. And then I think most of the value that we bring is really in that competitive bidding process where you saw, the spread between the lowest offer and the highest offer, on average being 265%, which is, in some ways kind of crazy. Um, I think this deck will be available on Follow the Well. This is just some kind of a commercial on us, but thank you. I think we'll go to questions. If anyone has any questions or wants me to pull up any of the former slides, happy to do that. I think if you have a question, hit the Q&A button and go ahead and type it in. I'll share one that we get all the time, which is when should I let my team know that I'm selling the business? And there's no one right answer. We've seen two very different approaches. One is when you start the company. Everyone as they get hired, you're telling them, I'm looking to build this so I can sell it to Coca-Cola in 5 years. That's the plan. And then it's never a surprise, right? The other is no one, never until the wire clears. And we've seen that too. I will tell you when you go through the process of selling the business, you will need your financial person on board because all of the buyers are going to ask for lots of different reports. And so unless you as the owner are the one with access to all of the QuickBooks and the financials and the KPIs, you're going to need someone to help you with that. So I would say your CFO, controller, financial person should be in on the process. Okay, I think we've got one question. Let's see. Is it better to ask for a higher valuation for my business and have fewer interested buyers, or set a low price and have them compete against each other? And how do I pick the right price to set? We recommend not setting a price. So generally, when we run a process, we present all of the information on the company, and we have bidders come to us with a price. In some smaller kind of mom and pop Main Street type businesses, we'll see a listing where you can buy this 7-Eleven store for $700,000. But in most middle market businesses, that's not the practice. You don't set a price. You'll talk to your investment banker about what an appropriate valuation range might be. And then, you're going to get a range of prices from different buyers. Let's see. Everyone seems to have a different opinion on where the economy is headed. How do I know when is the best time to sell my business? Again, I'd go back to our 3-factor framework of when is it right for you and when is your business ready. But on timing, especially with macro level timing, I would say, look, if you're going to have a big liquidity event, meaning you have this one asset that makes up most of your wealth, you have this company, and you're going to trade that company for dollars in the bank account, think about what you're going to do with those dollars. Most likely, you're going to invest it in something. You're not just going to have it sitting in a savings account. And if you're going to invest it in the market and real estate, that is going to track valuations of businesses as well. So if you sold at the very top end of the market, you most likely reinvested your proceeds at the very top end of the market. Conversely, if you sell at the very bottom end of the market, you got the lowest valuation in your industry. It's just, it's a tough time, but you had to sell. you probably reinvested those proceeds at the very low end of the market, and so there's more room for that to grow. So I would almost try to not overthink macro level economics because it's nearly impossible to predict. Um, any other questions? Okay, how often do deals fall through due to prior periods financial statements not being audited or reviewed by a CPA? Will buyers pay a premium for a potential target who has audited financial statements? Um, so where we play in the sub $100 million market, very few businesses have audited financial statements. There are different levels of review. So you can have your financial statements compiled by your CPA. You can have them compiled by your team internally and reviewed by the CPA, or you can have a real audit. For smaller businesses, it honestly doesn't matter too much. Yes, it will look a lot better if you have audited financial statements, but in many cases, the buyers will do what's called a quality of earnings. And that quality of earnings is in some cases even more detailed than an audit. And even if you have audited financial statements as a small business, you're unlikely to bypass that quality of earnings process. So I don't think deals fall apart due to not having audited financial statements. I do think it's easier if you have your financials, kind of scrutinized prior to your process. Another practice that we're seeing that's very, very common now, especially for mid-sized businesses, is to do what's called a sell-side quality of earnings. So instead of having the buyer come in and bring in their third-party accountants and ask you lots of tough questions, you go and do that process before the company is for sale with a third party and have them ask you tough questions. But then when you see red flags, when you see mistakes, when you see something not being accounted for properly, you're the first one to see that information and you can address it. And then when you go to market, you say, look, not only do we feel confident in our financials, we went and got a third party, we paid for it. And that cost, for a mid-sized business is, I don't know, $40,000 to $80,000. We paid for a third party essentially audit or something that is, on the same level as an audit. And here's their third party report. And that's a very strong statement. That helps processes quite a bit. Probably more so than audited financials. Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions, but I know this will be available as a recording. If you're viewing this as a recording on Follow the Well, please reach out. My information's here. It's max@roadmapadvisors.com. Reach out. We're happy to talk to anyone, regardless of size of your business. Again, thank you for joining today, and look for recordings on Follow the Well, and look for more webinars to come on other topics. Thanks, everyone.